They say the most dangerous person in your life isn't an enemy. It's the one who knew you before you learned how to edit yourself, before you learned what to hide, before you understood the power of silence. And for Meghan Markle, that person was never a journalist, never a palace aide, never a critic with a microphone. It was the man who lived beside her before the world was watching. The man who thought he was building a future while she was already rehearsing a different one. Trevor Engelson knew her before the polish, before the careful pauses, before the perfectly measured words and curated smiles. He knew her when there was nothing to gain from pretending. Their marriage didn't explode in public, no screaming headlines, no scandals splashed across magazines. It ended quietly, almost politely. But quiet doesn't mean empty. Quiet is where memory lives, and memory is dangerous because it doesn't bend just because someone else's life changes. Trevor didn't walk away with rage. He walked away with details, and people who carry real details don't rush to talk. They wait, they watch, they notice when stories start sounding a little too rehearsed, a little too clean, a little too perfect to be true. Long before royal titles and palace gates, Meghan was already practicing reinvention. She wasn't chaotic about it, she was precise. She learned how to be one version of herself for one room and a completely different one for another, without ever letting those rooms compare notes. To Hollywood, she was the struggling actress with ambition burning under the surface. To family, the polished daughter who played by the rules. To social circles, she was magnetic, confident, daring. And to the man she married, she was someone who always seemed to be planning the next step, even while standing still. Fast forward to 2016 in Toronto. On the surface, Meghan's life looked stable. She was filming Suits, living comfortably, enjoying the rewards of persistence. But underneath, the hunger was still there. And then Prince Harry entered the picture quietly, slipping into her world without the palace spotlight. It was framed as a sweet beginning, a private romance, something delicate and secret. But people tied to old circles described something far less innocent. That night wasn't just dinner and wine, it was indulgence without receipts, excess without witnesses. The kind of night where things can slide out of control fast if one wrong move is made. Names were mentioned that made rooms go quiet. Princess Eugenie's name alone raised the stakes. Whether she was involved or merely referenced didn't matter. The implication alone was enough to turn a risky situation into something explosive. Something went wrong that night. Not a full collapse, not a headline-grabbing disaster, but a close call. A moment where exposure brushed up against catastrophe. One call, one leak, one mistake, and everything could have ended before it ever began. And yet nothing happened. No police, no headlines, just silence. The kind of silence that only exists when powerful interests want it that way. To understand why that night didn't shock people who really knew Meghan, you have to understand the world she had built around herself. Toronto wasn't just a filming location. It was a playground. And at the center of it was Soho House. Not just a club, but a private ecosystem. No cameras, no questions. On the surface, it was elegance and laughter and expensive wine. Behind closed doors, it was indulgence without consequence. And Meghan wasn't floating through that world by accident. People didn't describe her as a guest. They described her as a connector. The one who knew who wanted what. The one who knew how to make things appear without anyone asking how. Her value was never just beauty or charm. It was access. She made people feel untouchable. She made nights stretch longer than they should. She made boundaries feel optional. And when you look at Toronto through that lens, 2016 stops feeling like a mistake. It starts feeling like routine. Years earlier, before Toronto and before royalty, there was Jamaica. Her wedding to Trevor was supposed to be carefree. Sun, sand, celebration. But guests didn't leave talking about romance. They talked about Meghan, about her sitting down and rolling joint after joint for guests, calmly, deliberately, as if she were managing logistics instead of partying. At the time, it was brushed off as quirky, fun, relaxed, but seen alongside her later years, it takes on a different meaning. This wasn't chaos, it was control. She wasn't part of the atmosphere. She was shaping it. What made Meghan different wasn't what she did. It was how cleanly she separated her worlds. Each group got just enough of her to feel special, trusted, chosen. No one got the full picture. That wasn't confusion, that was strategy. So when the stakes rose with Harry, she didn't panic. She knew how to move through risk without leaving fingerprints. People like to assume Prince Harry was naive, that he didn't see warning signs. But Harry wasn't new to scandal. He'd lived through Vegas, through whispers, through the palace, scrambling to contain stories. He didn't need someone to rescue him. He needed someone who wouldn't flinch when things got messy. Meghan didn't judge his chaos. She understood it. She offered discretion, not lectures, control instead of criticism. To him, that felt like safety, like freedom. That kind of bond locks in fast because it's built on shared silence. Every reinvention leaves marks. Meghan's just happened to be visible. Old photos show softer features, familiar lines. Over time, those features sharpened, narrowed, changed. Officially, it was refinement, Hollywood polish. But whispers from Toronto suggested something heavier. When surgery stops being cosmetic and starts being corrective, it's no longer about beauty. It's about erasing evidence. Each procedure became another layer between her present and her past. And it wasn't just physical. People disappeared. Friends vanished. Connections faded. Trevor, the man who knew her earliest patterns, was cut out completely, not drifting apart. Removal. Build a world. Take what's needed. Erase the witnesses. Start again. By the time questions surfaced, there was no one left close enough to answer them easily. Small inconsistencies began to pile up. Statements that didn't match earlier interviews. Claims of isolation that didn't align with travel records. Details that quietly changed. Even simple facts became slippery. And the palace noticed. Biographies were edited down. Descriptions softened. Distance was created. For an institution obsessed with precision, that silence spoke volumes. So who is Meghan Markle really? A woman swept along by destiny? Or someone who mastered reinvention long before a crown came into view? The pattern doesn't look accidental. It looks designed. And that's why the story doesn't fade. Because for every polished image, there's a shadow just outside the frame. For every carefully chosen word, there's someone who remembers the version that came before. Trevor remembers. Toronto remembers. Jamaica remembers. And the most unsettling part isn't what's already been hidden, it's what hasn't surfaced yet. And that's where the unease really settles in, because stories like this don't linger unless there's unfinished business humming beneath them. Reinvention works best when everyone who knew the earlier version stays silent forever. But silence isn't the same as forgetting. It just means the memories are waiting, aging quietly, gaining weight instead of losing it. What unnerves people isn't that Meghan changed. Everyone changes. It's the speed, the precision, the clean cuts. One version ends, another begins, and the bridge between them is burned so thoroughly that even asking questions feels inappropriate. Old friends suddenly don't exist. Old habits are reframed as misunderstandings. Old timelines blur. And anyone who might say, "That's not how I remember it," no longer has a seat at the table. Trevor never went on a crusade. He never sold interviews or demanded attention. That restraint is exactly what gives his presence weight. People who exaggerate shout. People who know weight. He saw patterns before they had consequences. He saw how charm could be a tool, how generosity could also be leverage, how being the supplier of fun made you indispensable. He saw how easily roles could be switched depending on who was watching. And when the world later watched Meghan step into a role that required absolute control of narrative, absolute emotional precision, absolute separation between image and reality, some people felt déjà vu because they'd seen the rehearsal. They'd lived inside earlier drafts of the same performance. The palace doesn't operate on feelings, it operates on risk, and risk is measured in unpredictability. The quiet narrowing of Meghan's public biography wasn't praise or punishment, it was containment. Fewer claims, fewer details, less room for contradiction. When an institution that catalogs everything chooses to say less, it's rarely accidental. What makes this story uncomfortable isn't one rumor or one night or one wedding anecdote, it's the accumulation. The way small things line up when viewed together. The way each reinvention requires something or someone to be left behind. The way the past keeps circling the edges instead of disappearing. People still argue whether Meghan is misunderstood or manipulative, victim or architect, but those aren't opposites. Someone can be wounded and strategic. Someone can crave safety and still manufacture it. Someone can feel trapped and still know exactly which doors to close behind them. The problem with erasing history is that history doesn't consent. It waits. In old photographs, in forgotten guest lists, in private conversations that never made it to print, in the minds of people who were there before the spotlight rewrote the script. And that's why this story refuses to die. Because it isn't driven by headlines, it's driven by memory. And memory doesn't care about titles or palaces or public sympathy. It just sits there, heavy and intact, reminding everyone that no matter how flawless the present looks, the past doesn't vanish just because it's inconvenient. Somewhere outside the frame frame of the carefully curated image, there are still people who remember nights that weren't supposed to matter, choices that weren't supposed to be connected, versions of Meghan that don't fit neatly into the official narrative. And the longer those memories stay unspoken, the more powerful they become. Because the most dangerous truth isn't the one shouted from rooftops. It's the one everyone quietly knows and is still deciding when or if to say out loud. If to say out loud. If to say out loud.